Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of a review so you catch up. You were at the first week, so you heard about just the anti-intellectualism, how we got here as a church. Okay, we've been going through evidences for God, and also in talking about those evidences, we'll also talk about. We have talked about science and how science relates to the Bible. Just kept thinking through that, but also thinking through debates that we have in-house as Christians, and things like the age of the earth or the role of science, and how those are important, but are interesting and important, but not central. And so when we're sharing our faith with people who don't believe, um, we talked a whole week about just categorizing or cataloging all those debates somewhere over here, so that when we're sharing our faith and someone says, well, what about this? You can say, well, you can go either way on that and still be a Christian. Let's talk about the gospel. That's sort of what the takeaway was from that. So last week we started talking about science, how it proves that there's a beginning to the universe. And then if there's a beginning, what it proved is that all things, matter, all energy, all space, and time itself came into existence. So whatever material, because matter came into existence, it has to be eternal because time came into existence and so on. And so when you start describing what the cause of the universe is, you get pretty much all the descriptions of theistic God. And so science discovered it, and we went through kind of, I think, a kind of humorous um, story about how scientists, including Albert Einstein, tried to deny that the evidence was what it was. And for decades, they tried to think of all these crazy theories, including doing bad math, just try and take away the beginning of the universe. And so it's kind of cool to watch and see that God's up there saying, you study my creation, you're going to find me, unless you really do some mental gymnastics to hide from that conclusion. So that was last week. We're going to continue with science a little. It's philosophy, but we're going to continue with science that supports the philosophy this week. But as a review, actually, I want to go back and, because when we advertised this class, I threw out a bunch of questions that were hypothetical questions that people could come up with that are common questions. And I didn't want, it struck me as I was preparing that somebody might look at what we're doing these weeks and say, well, that's false advertising because you listed certain questions in the ad and you didn't actually have a week on each one of those. But we are actually going through each one of them. So I wanted to throw them up on the screen also to sort of leave an open-ended, if there are ever any questions that you don't think that we're addressing that have been bugging you and nagging you. It could be something like, how could God order the killing of the Canaanites? Because God ordered the Israelites to go in and slaughter everybody, including animals and children. So that's something that people have to say, well, gee, God, why did you say that? It sounds more like Allah than it does Yahweh. At least that's the accusation. So if that's a type of a question. But I think we did cover, is there such a thing as absolute truth? Is Christianity intolerant? Well, only if there isn't absolute truth. And we can go through, if anyone's interested, the specific arguments, other than going to the Bible and saying in Romans it says this, and in Leviticus it says that against homosexuality. Because you can't, if they're not going to accept the Bible, you can't go and use proof text if they're going to just dismiss them. So if you want to meet them where they are, you have to do some little bit of philosophy, just sound reasoning with them. We can talk about those if you want, but hopefully in that first week when we went through how you can know things for sure and what logic is and reason, and it reflects reality the way the world is. It's not like we're trying to promote a Christian worldview. We're trying to understand reality. And it's a worldview, sure, but we want to see things for the way they are, not through some sort of artificially Christian lens. And then when we do see the world the way it is, lo and behold, it lines up perfectly with what the Bible teaches and what Christian teachers have read the Bible to say, including gender issues and same-sex attraction and things like that. Are miracles possible? We're going to deal with that specifically for a whole week, so I'm going to do that. How do I know God exists? That's what we're in the middle of. Are there any other questions that, I think these are all the ones I put in the bulletin, so they're the only ones I'm obligated by law to answer. But I just wanted to make sure that I didn't do false advertising. The reason we do it the way we do it is that if you think through from truth exists all the way to Christianity, several of these questions get answered along the way. If not explicitly, you start looking back on them after studying this book and just a clear thinking process. Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I don't even need to be told specifically what the answer is sometimes because it just sort of falls in place. That's another reason why I do it this way. So, building a structure, you start with the foundation. Christianity you can't build the third floor first; it'll fall down. It becomes the first floor of the basement. So, first, Christianity can't be true unless there's something as such as truth. Christianity can't be true if there's no such thing as God. So, you have to demonstrate that theism, that God exists. In other words, this can't be the Word of God if there isn't a God, and specifically a God that can do miracles. People sometimes we talk about miracles, walking on water and splitting the sea and stuff like that. But if you think about it, revealing a written revelation to mankind, very exciting. It's none of our kids. We all know that. God revealing the written word, that is a miracle. God's entering in time and space, and he's speaking or writing himself or inspiring, however the process goes for each different author. We know that he has given us a written word that is infallible and inerrant from him. That itself is a miracle. Every bit is walking on water. So that therefore the Bible can't be true if there's no such thing as miracles. If miracles are not possible, then the Bible couldn't possibly be revealed by God. So a lot's hinging on those first two. And then ultimately at the end, we say, okay, now we know that truth exists and there is a God that has all these certain attributes. That was Christianity, the religion that he's revealed. Let's look at that. So we look at the New Testament, and that's what we'll do the last couple of weeks. So I put it aside because it's an appendix in the book. And this is one question that's worth a whole week right alone, is the problem of suffering, the problem of pain. That is the biggest question for any belief system, not just Christianity. The answer, why is there so much pain and suffering? In the animal kingdom, they would say, but certainly in the human species. So does truth exist? Does God exist? In between, we have our miracles possible, like I just described, and then is Christianity true? That's what we're in the middle of building. Under truth, we had the 3 laws of thought. This was covered the week you were here, I think. Okay, so I'm going to put you through it. These 3 laws, we know they're true because if you try to deny them, you're using them, so you're sort of a dog chasing your own tail. You know that if you're using them in order to contradict them, that's why they're properly basic. You can't get underneath the laws of thought. There are a whole bunch of other things that are true, but not by definition or in themselves. Cosmological argument, which we went through last week, I actually should put arguments in parentheses there because there are actually several arguments. A cosmological argument means that you're arguing from effect to cause. So I look around me and see the world, and there are certain things about the world that I notice. And what's a cause? How do I explain the things that are in the world? We would say in creation, anything other than God. So we always talk about the beginning cosmological argument. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. There are other versions of it I just want you to be aware of that I think are really cool too. Some of them are even better, like the Thomistic one, but it's just harder to understand for modern people. But we don't talk like that anymore. Whereas this is our normal language, things that have a cause, or at the beginning of the cause. We all can do that. I used to use an analogy of like Batman's utility belt. These arguments are cool because they're easy to memorize. They're not long, and you don't need to know. In order to recite this, you don't have to know all that philosophy and science and stuff that we talked about last week. You can just state this, right? These are good to remember just to keep in your utility belt and pull them out if you need to in the conversation. But memorizing things is actually a really good way to be prepared. There are people that you are going to love as friends in your life that you don't even know right now. And the studying that you're doing right now to learn how to answer questions that they might have is actually loving people you may not even know yet, or people that you do know that you haven't had this conversation with. It's weird to think of, but the preparation ahead of time, whether it's parenting or witnessing, that is part of the witnessing process. Is the work it takes to learn. And Jesus took 3 years with the incarnate Son of God to have 12 people go out and spread Christianity. If Jesus had to do it that way, let these guys study, that's like an intensive. They got a PhD basically studying with him. Why do we think we should? This week we're talking about the design argument. The fancy word for this you'll see in the book is teleological. And just like the cosmological, there are several design arguments or teleology. Teleology in philosophy, a telos, the beginning of that word, is the why something. What's the purpose of something? The telos of a cow is to produce milk and hamburgers. The telos of a cat does not exist anymore. That was pick on cats. You get what I'm saying? Everything in the natural world that is not man-made has a telos, and it could be even as simple as what's the telos of a rock? Well, to give a firm foundation for that which is built on it, maybe to provide nourishment, like limestone to provide nourishment in the soil to be able to grow plants. And that things have a reason for why they are the way they are. That's what the teleological argument is. But when we look at the universe as a whole, we say, well, what's the design or the purpose of the universe? Now we're talking about arguments for God's existence as well. So every design has a designer, or had a designer, because I guess technically you could say the designer's gone. The universe was designed, therefore the universe had a designer. So again, it flows, you get it, yeah, I understand that's a valid argument. If the first two lines are true, then you have to accept the conclusion. These are good too. If someone's trying to resist their belief in God, you can say, okay, well, let me give you an argument and throw this out there and say, now it's valid, so you can't deny the logic of it. But which one of those two premises do you disagree with? Point them to a specific argument, force them to think it through. Like, okay, do you think that the universe doesn't have design? That's why I love the cosmological, because it's even easier for people to see. So, do you think the universe has always been here? Nobody really says that. Buddhists kind of talk that way, but they talk so mystical, it's hard to lock them down in cosmology. But nobody in our culture, Western culture, I think, would deny that there was a beginning to the universe. Okay, so number two is true. So, do you think number one is false, that things just come into being without being caused? That would be illogical, because it would be self-caused. Um, you have to exist prior to you in order to cause you to exist. All those things that I think we talked about last week, the logic argument of, well, we didn't do Hilbert's Hotel last week, did we? That's
No.
fun. We can do that later if we have. It's a thought experiment that shows the impossibility of infinite. And some nerdy philosophers came up with it, and since then everybody's come up with new scenarios to make it even funnier, or more. It's just something that we nerds do. Actually, I'm not a licensed nerd. I don't have a PhD. I hang out with them, so I'm not even good enough to be one of them. So same thing with this. The reason I like the cosmological is it's more commonly understood. Not everybody is willing to say, yes, the universe shows evidence of design, because they're not knowledgeable of the stuff we're going to cover tonight. So our job is to cover it. Does anybody know the name Antony Flew? He wasn't a household name, but he was everybody in philosophy knew him in the 1800s. Sorry, the 1900s. A long time ago. He was a philosopher. His essay in 1950 called Theology and Falsification was the most quoted. It was like their Bible tract, atheist. The most celebrated academic atheist of the 1900s. He actually did informally debate C.S. Lewis. So he goes all the way back, because he's from Oxford. He very, very strong pedigree. And he would debate Christians all the time. But old style atheists weren't jerks like modern atheists. We call them the new atheists, and one of the reasons they're called the new atheists is that they're mean. They're not like this guy. He was just an academic who said, I think that the evidence and reason says that atheism is the case. And he gives his arguments, and they debate all that. The reason I can say that is that Gary Habermas, a Christian, we quote in the book at length in the Resurrection chapter, became friends with them because they debated so often on the road. And they would hang out afterwards. Got to the point where their wives would come to them to the debates, and they would go debate on stage, and then the two couples would go vacation together for a week. And they got really tight. You couldn't do that with Richard Dawkins or the new atheists, because they're in it for different reasons. So I like to say that to give this guy kudos. Now, the question is apologetics and arguing and philosophy. You can never argue somebody into the kingdom. You've heard that. You can never argue someone to believe Christianity. That is not what we see, actually. You can't force somebody to accept Christ, but you can, if they're willing to be open, you can demonstrate to them that it's true, and then they can decide what to do from there. The person who wrote the book that we quoted a lot last week is called the book is called God and the Astronomers. He was he called himself an agnostic his whole life, and his is a sad story, even though it's a success story. He came to believe that God exists. He came to believe that Christianity's got the best shot if there is a religion. But he said, I have sinned too much, too greatly. The things I've done are so bad that I can't accept what the cross stands for, which is full forgiveness. He just had this view of his sin that was too much, full of shame. He grew up in maybe a Catholic or Orthodox environment, I don't know, but so it's a sad story. But it does demonstrate in his case that you can study the evidence and you can come to believe, yes, it's true. The Bible says that you have to get to that point to believe that it's true. You have to conclude that before you can accept Christ, because no one believes or no one accepts Christ if they don't believe Christ even existed or was who he said he was. So the Bible says anyone who's going to come to God must first believe that he exists and that he rewards people who are actually seek him. So you have to believe in his existence first. So for these people, they didn't take that next step. Anthony Flew, same thing. So that background, debated C.S. Lewis, the most celebrated atheist of the 1900s, at least the second half of the 1900s, came out with a book that was based on this conversion. He came out and said, I believe in God. You can imagine, like somebody like a Richard Dawkins, if you know him, giving that press release, how it would rock the world. Everybody was freaking out. The atheists were saying he's obviously senile. These Christians are taking advantage of him because he's crazy in his old age. It was a big deal in our world of atheists and Christians debating. So Gary Habermas decided to interview him and say, we're friends, right? So let's just talk about your conversion. So he said, which arguments for God's existence did you find most persuasive in your conversion? He said, I think the most impressive arguments for God's existence are those that are supported by recent scientific discoveries. So he values science. That's another reason why I think we need to come to people with science as much as we can. I think the argument to intelligent design is enormously stronger than it was when I first met it. So you like arguments such as those that proceed from Big Bang cosmology and fine-tuning? Yes. So of the major theistic arguments such as the cosmological, design, moral, the only really impressive ones that you take to be decisive are the scientific forms of design, he says, absolutely. So he says intelligent design is what convinced him that God exists. One of the reasons probably why secular activists don't want it taught in schools, because it is very, very compelling. Doesn't mean that that the Christian God exists yet, but we're getting there. Okay, the design argument, actually, let me give three forms of it or versions of it, all kind of saying the same basic thing, but when you separate them this way, I think you see how much more profound and compelling they are. So first, we're going to talk about the laws of physics. That means like gravity, the strong and weak nuclear force. This isn't saying that how Earth. You've heard people say Earth was tilted just a little bit more, that the seasons would be too imbalanced, or if our magnetic poles weren't stable. All these different things that have to be the case. But that's just okay. We happen to have all of those, which is a design argument. We're going to do that on number 3. Well, I'm talking about the laws of physics. If they weren't exactly the values that they are in each case, no life anywhere would be possible. The whole universe would be nothing but hydrogen molecules, for example, or it would have collapsed back in on itself in a big crunch. There would be no possible life, even conceptually. So that's why I think it's important to start there, because it's so much more powerful than just saying, well, we got really lucky here on Earth. We're talking about the laws of physics themselves. And then design in an organism, which is the one I think most people are used to seeing, and then the habitability of Earth. So, as a history, the design argument actually goes all the way back to Plato, probably even before him. But Plato argued formally for there's nature shows design, therefore there must be gods, is what he would say. He certainly wasn't a Christian. So, if someone ever says like this new intelligent design thing is just the way you Christians are trying to hijack science, it's been around for like 2,400 years. So Christianity didn't even exist when the design argument was first being argued for by Plato. But the most famous person or form of it came from a guy named William Paley, Paley. He was in the early 1800s. Now, this was before Darwin, before a lot of modern, didn't know as much. So this was largely an analogy as opposed to an argument like we would make today. So it's important to give him a break. He gets a lot of flack from detractors, atheists, and unbelievers. In fact, the interesting background here, Pele is the very reason Darwin wrote his book. He was trying to refute what Pele said about design in nature. He was saying, okay, this is the appearance of design, the way William Paley said, but here's how I can explain it just with completely unguided, unintentional processes. And he basically said this: if you were to walk along the beach and you look down and you see washed up on the shore a watch, pick it up, you look at it, you observe all the gears and see that it ticks and all that, you wouldn't say, oh, isn't it amazing what erosion and wind and the random banging of particles in the ocean produce. Wow, it's pretty cool. He says everybody would look at that and say, okay, we're looking at something that was made by a mind. He says, but when we look at organisms, we see the same kind of. Now remember, he just had a gross anatomy, he wasn't into the cellular yet, so he didn't know how strong this argument really was. But he's saying, look, you got all these heart and lungs, and they work perfectly. If they weren't working all together, then nothing would we wouldn't be alive. Just like if the watch had one gear out, it wouldn't work as a watch. So that's as simple argument as that. It was so powerful that it held the day for decades until Darwin came along and they thought that he had refuted it. So another way of looking at it is if you saw this rock formation, you would say, all right, it was caused by erosion. The Colorado River cut through, and there you go, we got an explanation. But you wouldn't say erosion caused this rock formation. That would be irrational. Um, the important thing here is this, again, looking at Grand Canyon and Mount Rushmore, is not an argument, a scientific argument. This is an analogy. So we're appealing to somebody's instincts. Like we all agree that obviously the faces of our four presidents is a different kind of rock formation than the Grand Canyon. We can all agree on that. Okay. At this point, we're not trying to make an argument for intelligent design. We're just trying to get the concept across. I say that because I think we as Christians, I've been guilty of it too. We overreach. We have an argument or a line of reasoning that's good, but we go right for the jugular. Like, oh, Mount Rushmore, see, God exists. And the person, if they're thoughtful, will say, I don't see how that forces me to think God exists. The Big Bang and the beginning of the universe, we show, well, okay, you don't want to call it God, but whatever the cause is eternal, all-powerful, these characteristics that you can call it George if you want, but it sounds an awful lot like what the Christians mean when they say God. See how much more powerful that argument is. So just know where all of these analogies and arguments fit so that we don't overreach or misrepresent. That's all I want to say there. If the universe, now we're talking about the laws of physics and the original conditions. Now, the thing that blew my mind when I first started digging deeper into this after reading this book is I always kind of thought that because there was a beginning to things, that all these laws just sort of fell into place because they had to. Sort of like water retreating to the crevices of say, a waffle iron. Well, we wouldn't get excited about how water just fell perfectly where it did on a waffle iron because we had to go there. Turns out that's not the case. There's nothing about, say, gravity, which is a constant in the universe, that forces the strong nuclear force to be what it is. Those values could have been different. There's nothing interdependent about them. So it seems arbitrary. An analogy is used sometimes that if you had a wall of knobs that had 1,000, from 0 to 1,000 on there, 999, and you had, say, 100 of them, and each one had to be exactly the right number, and it happened accidentally. That would be the laws of physics. Sorry, water this week, so I'm gonna freeze up. So there's no reason that they had to be that, but they are that. So it calls out for an explanation. Even if the explanation is something other than God, you got to explain it. You can't just leave it hanging out there. So one of those is how fast the universe is expanding. So if you imagine a creation event and the universe starts to expand, but it's going slow enough that over time gravity would start to work too well and it would just collapse back in, called the big crunch. At the same time, if it went too fast, then it would be each particle would be moving away from the other particles so quickly that gravity wouldn't be able to work and have, say, two hydrogens collide to create helium, and then helium colliding to build the heavier elements down to the physical elements in the star cores. You see how you have to have it exactly the right expansion rate. There's no reason, again, for it to be expanding exactly the way it is. It just happens to be that, or it happens to be that, and therefore life is possible. It's one of them. This is a list of 35 of these constants. I won't read them because some of them I can't pronounce. But I took this from a book, Creator in the Cosmos. And if these 35, well, I'll give you the punchline later, but think about, just look at each one of those and realize, again, that some of them have some interrelations. The four constants, which are gravity, strong and weak nuclear force, and I think thermodynamics. That's four. I can't remember the fourth one. But those are the four basic laws of physics that give us all these laws. You look at all 35 of them. Now, I have to, as often as possible, bring things back to movies because that was my undergrad degree and I have to justify my existence and my money that was spent on it. But has anybody not seen the movie Dumb and Dumber? You have or have not? Okay, good. I recommend it. I mean, it's got some crude parts, but not that bad. So in the 1994 film Dumb and Dumber, Jim Carrey, he plays the role of Lloyd Christmas is his name. And he's an underachiever challenge, we'll call him, common sense challenge. He was dumb. And he falls in love with Mary, chases her across the country. He falls in love with her because he gave her a ride in the limousine that he drove, so it was deep. And so I want to show you this scene here. I'll show you the first one. Make sure it's on.
I like you. I like you a lot. I want to ask you a question. Straight out. Flat out. And I want you to give me the honest answer. What do you think the chances are of a guy like you and a girl like me ending up together?
Well, Lloyd, that's difficult to say. We really don't.
Hey, just give it to me straight. I came a long way just to see you, Mary. Just least you can do is level with me. What are my chances?
Not good.
You mean not good like 1 out of 100?
I'd say more like 1 out of a million.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah! I read it.
All right, so if Floyd, now I used to have this slide and I said, if Floyd is dumb, then atheists are dumber. Because you go with the name of the movie, but I thought, okay, that's not right. So if Floyd's an optimist and he's saying 1 out of a million, you're telling me there's a chance, 1 out of a million, yes. Okay, we all think, okay, that's dumb, you're obviously irrational. Is atheism's chance. Atheism meaning that this all happened with no design. It was completely a roll of the dice. What are the chances? Is it 1 out of a million for that to happen? 1 out of 10 to the 120th power, 120 zeros after the number. To give you an idea how large that number is, if you were to count the individual atoms in the universe, the entire universe, the number would be 1 times 10 to the, I think it's 82nd. It's in the 80s, 82nd or 86th. That's how crazy of a roll of the dice that is. So if Lloyd's optimistic, then they're eternally optimistic. So if what's the answer that the atheists give? Because this is overwhelming, and this is their data. Theirs meaning the scientists, and as they study the cosmos, this is what they come up with. So we come back to them and we say, all right, well then, what are the chances? What do they come back with? Well, they say, if the universe wasn't so finely tuned that life was possible, then we, being alive, wouldn't be here to observe that it was finely tuned. So we shouldn't be surprised that it is finely tuned, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't be here to be surprised. You gonna get their logic? It sounds compelling at first. Who remembers the answer to that, or one of the comebacks? It actually was, I can't remember what country he's from, but a Christian or a theistic philosopher. He came up with this brilliant analogy. He said, okay, imagine you're overseas in, say, an Islamic country, and they arrest you and they want to find an excuse to execute you because you're American, right? They want to make an example. So they put you in front of the firing line, got 100 trained marksmen, they're all pointing their rifles at you, and you hear them say, ready, aim, fire, and you hear a bunch of 100 cracks going off with guns, but you're still alive at the end. Would you simply say, well, I shouldn't be surprised I'm alive, because if I were dead, I wouldn't be here to be surprised that I'm alive? Is that satisfying as an explanation why 100 trained marksmen didn't hit you? No, you still have to have, okay, I'm glad I'm alive, but still, why is it that you guys all missed? Was this a show? Was it you just trying to scare me to death? Is it my frat buddies pranking me? Or, what is it? I have to have an explanation, right? Same with the universe. You can't say, well, it wouldn't be here to be surprised if it wasn't finely tuned, and walk away saying, oh, thank you very much, I'm satisfied with that answer. It's sort of just a way to not think deeply. So, like I said before, Darwin was trying to show that Paley was wrong, that these things seem designed, but I'm going to give you an explanation, Darwin saying, why I think I can account for their existence, human animals, species, without there being a designer. He didn't really talk a lot about God, but he meant God every time he would say. So he, as a good scientist, you're supposed to say, here's my theory, and here's a way my theory could be proven wrong in principle. I think I've demonstrated that that doesn't hold, therefore my theory is reasonable. That's, roughly speaking, the scientific method. So he, like a good scientist, said, okay, well, how can my theory be proven wrong? If it can be demonstrated that any, even one, complex organ existed. So he's not talking about species, he's talking about inside of us, right? If even one of those could not have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, then my theory would break down. So, okay. The search for such organs or systems is just doing what he told us that is legitimate to do. So even if somebody wants to say, I think intelligent design fails, they can't say it's not science, because the scientist said, well, that's exactly what would prove my scientific theory wrong. So sometimes it's, again, good to remind the atheists we're talking to that in principle you should be encouraging intelligent design people to be searching this out. Because Darwin said in principle that it's a legit thing to go after. So this is where I think, yeah, okay, I'm going to switch to the next slide. I only got halfway done, or roughly a little more than halfway done with transferring the old slides to the new system and organizing it in this new way. So forgive the really bad slides next, because they're old. Irreducible complexity, that's a term you should be familiar with, just in Christian circles. I always say this, let me ask you this, do I say too many parenthetical things? Because I feel like I have a lot of rabbit trails, but I'm trying to bring it back so that you understand the main thought process. But I keep thinking of things that, oh, that'd be really cool to know that, or I wish I would have known that when I was first. So that's why I do it. If you ever feel like I'm like veering off too much, you can't follow the original thesis, just throw something at me. But what I'm trying to do in this talk here is there are so many more deep, profound philosophical ways to look at design, but I think that's just jumping in too deep. You have to be aware of certain things. You have to know Darwin saying that it's legitimate. You have to know about Paley. You have to know about we talked about the odds of all the laws being what they are. Another thing you have to know to be just able to have a conversation about design is this concept of irreducible complexity, because this rocked the Darwinist world. They're still angry about this. I'll explain why. But irreducible complexity is essentially is a term for what Darwin just said. If a system can be found that couldn't have been, come about by small, successive, minute changes, then my theory is false. So this came out as okay, can we point to some that couldn't have come about that way? How do I know they couldn't have come about? Irreducible complexity. Systems that consist of several interlocking parts that must be in place before they can function as a system. There you go. It was first proposed, at least in its present form, by this guy here, Michael Behe, who's going to be helping us with another course coming up here soon. So we like working with him. What was so amazing about this book, Darwin's Black Box, is he doesn't quote any scripture. He doesn't. He just says, "All right, Darwin said this is a way to defeat his theory. I think I can demonstrate that in these subcellular systems." So here we go. That's what he did. The other thing that was nice is that he was a tenured professor at Lehigh University, so they couldn't fire him. And Lehigh has come out with several press releases. We don't accept any of Michael Behe's work. We reject him completely in his work on intelligent design. They've done everything but, call him a convicted rapist or whatever. And they just bashed him. That's how powerful his argument is, because he's embarrassing them, because he came out with this book and the Darwinists still don't have a good answer for him. And it came out in 93, 94. So it's been a long time that this theory has been out, this irreducible complexity. So here's the easiest way to understand it. It's the mousetrap. This is what he uses in the book. So imagine a mousetrap minus any one of those 5 parts. Would it be a mousetrap? Would it function even as a slightly less efficient mousetrap? Or would it just not function at all? Of course, it won't function at all. You don't have every single one of those. And just kind of do thought exercises in your mind. Like, take away one of them, and what is it? So that's essentially his argument. Now, he's pointing to cellular systems, actually subcellular systems. This is what's called the poster child of the intelligent design movement. This is the bacterial flagellum. And everything you're seeing there is actually a living organism. This is not a man-made machine. The flagellum is the outboard motor that allows a bacteria, certain species of bacteria, to swim through liquid. This is an actual electric motor using electricity, just like we do, to spin the piston. I'm taking it apart to show you all the different parts that have to come together. All those parts are protein configurations. That's a subsystem inside of the smallest living organism, a bacteria. So Michael Behe simply says, yeah, I think I found one, because like the mousetrap, take away any one of those parts and it doesn't work. It's not a slightly less useful flagellum. It's not a flagellum, is the point. So if you ever want to get, there are several videos on YouTube that have to do with the life inside the cell. One of them, I can't remember the name of it, but it goes through all of the RNA and moving parts from one part of the cell to the other. There's transportation systems, there's storage, it looks like a little city. It is amazing inside of each one of our cells. And again, take one of those away, what do you have? But this is the one that they couldn't get around. And they tried. They actually had to write papers to refute it. Another reason we know that irreducible complexity is a scientific theory, because you can, in principle, write a theory, write a paper that explains how these parts could have assembled accidentally and one by one, where they all weren't present at the same time. That'd be a scientific paper, which means it's, in principle, a scientific theory. Additionally, you have the DNA, which is nothing but information. It's an actual language. We'll go through this. Remember alphabets? They don't have them anymore, do they? I haven't seen them at Harris Teeter. They don't. I haven't seen them. But we remember them. You remember? Okay. Eventually, I'm not gonna be able to show the slide because what? All right, kids will look at us like we're crazy. But imagine you came down in the morning, teenage boy. You come down in the morning. It's garbage day, and the box fell over, and it says "Take out the garbage." Box. And the teenage boy says, "Huh, that's crazy how that came about accidentally." He goes to school and doesn't take the garbage out. You think his mom didn't let him off the hook with that excuse? I just thought the box fell over. It's just crazy that it spelled that out. So obviously, no. Again, this is an analogy again, but it's the same principle that you wouldn't look at any information that is in language that obeys rules, linguistic rules, has an alphabet, and say that it's not from an intelligent agent. But that's exactly what we have with DNA. There are 4 proteins, and it's represented with an A, T, and a C, and a G. So we have a 4-digit code. So we're not binary, we're quaternary, whatever you call it. But a 4-letter alphabet. Now, the profound thing to me, I can't remember where I first heard it, but I asked William Dembski was a professor for us for a while. And so I was driving him one day, and I was like, okay, let me just see if I get this straight. Even in Darwinist schema, the very first organism, the single-cell amoeba, basically, that could reproduce, it had the same DNA code, right? Yep. He said, so no, it doesn't matter how simple an organism is. It's the same 4 letters, obeying the same laws of language, if you want to call it, or grammar, but it operates exactly like our DNA does. Now, Darwinists will say, see, that's why we know that we all descend from the same creature, because the DNA just had to make little modifications on the code, which isn't true, but that's their claim. But think about that. From no alphabet to no language to no meaning behind the words, you go from nothing to a completely robust code that's sophisticated enough to make human beings right away, instantly. It only made amoeba and other smaller, in their model, smaller organisms, and got slowly more sophisticated over time. But the code was there from day one. That's powerful. Where did that come from? Out of nowhere. From non-living to living, or non-information to information. So we are talking about information, and it's not even an analogy to talk about the DNA, to talk about computer codes that we write. It is the same thing. It's a different language. Like saying Pascal is different than C++, therefore neither one of them are computer languages. No, they are both computer languages, but they're just different languages. So if you were to take the DNA of an amoeba, which at least today is the simplest life form on Earth in terms of how many digits are in their code, and you compared it to take out the garbage mom, what would the analogy be? Would it be equal to an entire volume of Encyclopedia Britannica? You think about one volume of this encyclopedia, and you're leafing through it, all the articles in there, all the citations, all the glossaries and indexes, and the entire, however many, 24 set volume of Encyclopedia Britannica. It's actually worse than that. An amoeba has the equivalent of 1,000, not books, volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica. In an amoeba, just to get your mind wrapped around how specified this information has to be. So again, how did that happen so that instantly, when the amoeba, first of all, the code just came into existence somehow. That's difficult for them. And origin of life researchers actually admit we have no plausible explanation for going from non-life to life. And the more we know, the more insanely impossible this seems. They'll actually admit that. They don't broadcast that, but they do talk like that with each other. But to go from non-life to a code that delivers 1,000 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica, that's the leap you have to take if you're going to believe it was an accident. And like the book suggests, I don't have the faith to believe that. So, technically speaking, what we're talking about now is not the fine-tuning of the laws of physics that were present right at the moment of creation. We're talking about as we observe life here on Earth. So we have life that we can look at. It's right here, right now. We're not looking at the past. We're looking at today. So think about, okay, how could life that complicated, that came from an intelligence, have risen on Earth and developed on Earth? You ever seen the movie 2001: Space Odyssey? Boring, but I had to see it because I was in film school and they made us watch it. This is the thesis of that movie, the theme of that movie. And this is a serious scientific explanation for this. It's called panspermia. panspermia, of course, to impregnate or put the information in from outside. Now, it could be one of two things. A space alien flew here on a spaceship and found early Earth and said, hey, this could be inhabitable someday. Here's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to plant these organisms that have the ability to procreate all over the planet in such a way that he or she or it or whatever knew that it would end up with complex life. Okay, you can believe in ET doing that. The other version of it is that somewhere out there in the universe that has really radically different environment than Earth, where for some reason it was conducive to life coming from non-life, life was begun, and it got trapped into meteorites and traveled the distance across the cosmos and crashed into Earth in its early days, exposing these organisms, and that's how life got seeded here on Earth. Those are serious theories that are posed. That movie, I didn't see it yet, and I don't really want to, but Prometheus, it came out a few years ago. It was a prequel to the Aliens story saga, and I knew it was about this theory of panspermia, so I'm like, watch it, sounds stupid. But they seriously are proposing that. So again, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, but that's their answer. And I'll say, okay, so you'd rather believe in little spacemen or big spacemen or whatever that flew all the way across the universe and did this all these millions of years, billions of years ago. That's to you more rational than believing in a God that all the philosophy tells us exists already. That you're comfortable with that as a non-believer, and it's okay. Francis Schaeffer talked about one of the things we do as apologists is we make people uncomfortable in their beliefs. We don't want to put a stone in a pebble in their shoe. Is one analogy, and not in an unloving way, but in a way that says you shouldn't just go about your day content with rejecting Christianity if that's where you have to go to do it. That should bother you a little bit. So next time someone shares their faith, maybe they'll be a little bit more open. Or next conversation you get in with them. So Fred Hoyle is actually was no friend of Christianity. He's one of the first ones to try and fight the Big Bang theory because he knew that it meant there was a God. And he was open. He said, yeah, this is what the physics tell us, but I'm going to find some other explanation because I don't want there to be a God. He flat out said that. He didn't hide it. But he said, look, a common sense interpretation of the facts, when you look at design or information, suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. So he admits, but yet he still says, I don't want to believe in God. But there are no blind forces in chemistry or physics or biology at play. Well, if they're not blind, then they're intentional. So the forces that you're calling forces, I guess it's ET that he is going to have to appeal to. Stephen Meyer, a Christian, and one of the heroes of the intelligent design movement, he's one of the presidents over at the Discovery Institute. At nearly the same time that computer scientists were beginning to develop machine languages, molecular biologists were discovering that cells had been using something akin to a machine code or software all along. Again, like last week, we said, when you start to look at God's creation, the effects, like Romans 1 says, you will find God. Give it long enough, you're going to find God. By the very tools that in order to be able to study the DNA code, we had to have our technology at a significant level that brought about computers, which have its own code, which allowed us to look at DNA to see a code. I think that's kind of ironic. That God says, I'm going to let technology develop in such a way that as it develops, you're going to be, okay. Unless you really, 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 really don't want God to exist, and so you think of all the ways you can to ignore it. And I love this quote. This is the last one. If I can create life here in the laboratory, I will have proven that it didn't take any intelligence to create life in the beginning. So you see the irony there. That's half tongue in cheek, because they come back with some answers to that. But there's something to be said that life does not happen accidentally, and that's what all these experiments produce. So a lot more to say about that if you're interested in it. I'm interested enough in this topic to get into the probabilistic arguments. I stick with those usually, just the cosmos and come on, forget biology is so insanely complicated. Like no, we can't wrap our minds around that. So they can just say, well, maybe someday we'll discover some way of panspermia. Maybe it is true. All right, but that space alien hasn't been here forever because the universe had a beginning, and his existence wouldn't be possible if the laws of physics weren't exactly what they are. So you can't get out of it. You can't punt ET with the first argument, which is why I like it. So I don't know what I was doing here, but pretty cool, huh? Oh yeah, let me say this because we have time. First of all, any questions? That either means that it was so well explained, there's no questions left, or it was so boring that no one wants it to keep going on. One of the two. Or it could be a third. This is something one of our professors came up with, and I thought, wow, that is cool because it's a defeater to Darwinism, but it also is easy to explain. It's very deep philosophically, and when he explains it at that level, my eyes crossed. But he explained it this way, and I said that is worth using. So here's what we're going to do. If you look up at these stars, what constellation is that?
Is that Orion?
Orion. Those points of light are not in any causal relationship with one another, right? Each of those, they're extremely far away from each other. One of them is actually a nebula. It's not even a star. So they're not even the same types of light emitting structures in the cosmos. So what is Orion? We all, if you look at it, if you know enough about constellations, that's the Big Dipper, that's Orion, you can point them all. We all know what we mean, but there's no causal relation between each of those dots, and yet we all can say that's Orion. So then think about constellation. What do we mean by constellation? Is there anything in the stars, in nature, that we're actually pointing to? Orion, I mean.
Some astronomers just drew lines to connect the dots and said that's Orion. Other than what just mentioned in Job too.
Well, he's doing the same thing. And the Jews knew the constellation. I'm sure Job was a Jew.
It's art. This is what it is. It's not science. It's art.
And exactly, it's man. We as humans putting meaning on top of points of data, and he calls that a construct. Nothing wrong with saying that's Orion, because when we say Orion, it has meaning. People can picture in their head what we mean by Orion. We can say, okay, tonight I can probably go out and there it is right there. So it has meaning, and people can talk intelligently about Orion. But it's not a thing in and of itself. It's a construct. So here's what he's saying about, So that's the construct, and that's the drawing that the ancients, the Greeks, put over those dots to draw Orion. I think was he a demigod or a god? I can't ever keep track which ones were demigods and which ones were gods. My kids read the book series on what's his name? Percy Jackson. Yeah, kids read all of those. They know all of the pantheon of Egypt and Greece and Rome and the Vikings. It's cool, and they know that they're false. So there's a construct. Now, pick that up and put it into paleontology, the finding of dead things in the rocks. When you find a Tyrannosaurus Rex skull, and then over here you find a kneecap, and it's just all these pieces of dead things in the rocks. And you can date them. You can use radiometric dating and say, okay, I know this looks like a femur, and it dates to this time period. Okay, that is a point. Femur, billions of years ago, millions of years ago. We'll just go with it for now, okay? So that's a point of data. And over here we find a tooth, and that's another point of data. You start getting all these points of data, and you start reconstructing the tree of life. You remember that from school, Darwin's tree of life? There actually isn't any such thing as a tree of life, just like there's no such thing as Orion. But you can talk about the points on that tree of life intelligently. So it's not right, it's not true to say Darwinism is false, because that would be the same thing as saying Orion is false. That doesn't make any sense. But if you say Darwinism is a construct to try and explain the points of data, fine. Let me tell you why I think design is a better constellation or construct to put over the points of data. And you can do what we just did here. All right, to go from this morphological feature, meaning a large animal like a big T-Rex bone, to go to that from what we find over here, which dates earlier, that is this size or soft-bodied or whatever. Let me tell you what would have to happen. Information injected into the system, and it can't happen, has to happen all at the same time. These are all signs of intelligence. So if I put intelligence as an explanatory power over those 2 points of data, this picture comes into better focus if we say something outside of the biological system, the entire ecosystem, was doing things so that everything happened just so we would get here at the end. That's our construct. So what our professor who came up with this said, he said, one of the things I think, one of the reasons that intelligent design has not as much headway as it could. It made a big splash initially, and it was all the things we saw. It's awesome. It's a great critique of Darwinism. But Darwinists, they claim to be giving us a literal story of the life on Earth, not a construct. They say, no, it's literally true, Darwinism. But the mistake they're making is all they're doing is telling a story over the data that is literally true. So the point of light of a femur from a T-Rex dating to 300 million years ago, fine, okay, that's a point of data. Step back. That doesn't say anything. It just says there's a bone that we found here. But I take that and I put it to that and that and that and that point, we start to get a construct we lay over it called Darwinism. They don't see that they're saying that. They think they're saying something literally true. Intelligent design comes along and says, oh, no, Darwinism is literally false. Intelligent design is literally true. They're making the same mistake because they're saying that it's literally the case as opposed to a construct, a constellation put over. What he's saying is if the design community would simply say, you guys aren't saying anything literally true, that's fine. It doesn't mean Darwinism is false because it's not a literal story. It's a construct. That's what science does when we're talking about things that happened in the past. Because all you have are points of data in the past, right? You don't have things in the lab right now. So good job. You guys tried the best you can. It doesn't really answer all the questions, all these things we discussed. Let me give you another construct to put over it, and that is intelligence. What we see in the development of life on Earth has all the hallmarks of intentionality and purpose and coming to end in this species here. That's what it looks like. It looks like the entire history, both plant and animal life, was so that we could live here at this time of history. That's our explanatory power or construct that we put over the data. If you say that, it sounds a little bit more coming at it more humbly, a little more calm, reasonable. And then you get talking about why they think Darwinism is still a better explanation. And you could probably win that one easily just by talking about the failings of Darwinism. But does that make sense? That wasn't in the book. That's bonus material. But when JT, our dean actually, right now, when he first shared that, I was like, man, everyone should be able to articulate that. Pretty straightforward. So next time you go outside and you see Orion and his belt and his sword, they don't have a sword on there, but that's a sword on there. I think it's that middle star there, one of those that's actually a nebula, it's not even a star. So, pretty cool. Kudos to JT Bridges. I had to give him, give him proper attestation. So that's it.